managing short-term absence virtual boardroom that is being facilitated by HR Recruit and Nathan Andrews. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Nathan, who will introduce himself shortly. Nathan will look at how line managers can effectively manage short-term absence, looking at possible causes, reviewing them and identifying the patterns. If you've got any burning questions, put them into the chat box facility. We're on tight timescales today, so if we get a chance to cover the questions at the end, then we will do. If not, I'll send the questions to Nathan and he can feed back to me and I'll pass on the answers afterwards. I'm going to hand you over to Nathan, who will introduce himself and start the event. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. It's nice to be here with you all again today. I'm sure many of you may have seen me deliver webinars before, because Jo and I have worked together for some time now, but it is nice to be with you today. As Jo said, the topic of discussion is short-term sickness absence. So it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour of managing kind of short-term sickness absence, because I want to have some time for questions. As Jo said, I've got a finish time about 1:10 past because I've got an appointment this afternoon, so I need to be away on time. But I'm hoping we'll have some time for questions at the end. And obviously, if we don't get a chance to cover all the questions, if you email them to Jo, she can forward them on to me and we can get some answers back over to you. Just by way of introduction, for those of you who haven't encountered me before on one of these webinars, my name is Nathan Andrews. I am the head of HR services at Frettens Solicitors. I'm not a solicitor, I'm an HR practitioner. I've been practicing for 22 years. I am an employee relations specialist. So my area of work is under the employee relations umbrella, dealing with largely contentious issues with clients, working on things such as HR case management, conduct of complex investigations, and mediation and conflict resolution. Just to give you a bit of background, so I spend a lot of my time supporting organisations and client organisations advising on short-term sickness absence. So a starting point today is to talk about rights under employees' employment contracts before we get into the more nitty-gritty element of short-term sickness absence. So employees' rights to pay in relation to short-term absence is determined according to their terms of employment, which will be covered under their contract of employment, and also the supplementary documentation that you have in place, such as the employee handbook. So your employee handbook should state what employees' obligations are when they are unable to attend work, so how they should notify you, what supporting medical certification is required, etc. That should all be clearly set out in your employment documentation so that employees understand what is required of them when essentially reporting their sickness absence. So your employment contract, your staff handbook, these are important documents for you to have and to use as a framework by which you will manage short-term absence. As a line manager, so for line managers on the webinar today, you should make sure that you are familiar with your organisation's overall rules and requirements, because again, you need to be able to apply them consistently in practice and be able to use them as a framework when you are dealing with issues as they arise in relation to short-term sickness absence. So just to cover off common causes of frequent absenteeism, and I will be sending the slides to Jo, and she will forward them on to you or to those parties who want a copy. But employees' frequent short-term absences can have a number of root causes. And I always say to line managers, we need to be curious about what the root causes are, because that's going to help us identify issues and also opportunities to support an employee if they've got ongoing health conditions that require maybe adjustments, etc. But root causes can include an underlying medical condition which can flare up from time to time. It can be due to personal family problems. It can be it can be an unusually high but genuine vulnerability to colds and flu, for example. These are things that you need to give consideration. So again, that could be an underlying medical condition that you may need to explore. Specific problems in the workplace can be a contributing factor, as I'm sure we're all aware, particularly if we're working in the HR space. So that's something to be mindful of. Excessive tiredness, perhaps because the employee stays out late at night or has a second job. These are issues that I see regularly and actually have dealt with recently. So again, when people are reporting that they're excessively tired, there could be an underlying health condition, but it also could be that you've got a younger population of employee, for example. And I know that that's not me being discriminatory, but sometimes you can work in environments where you have a demographic is younger and employees maybe are out more regularly, attending social events, etc. So these could be contributing factors, and the way you're going to understand if that is an issue is by having conversations with people, essentially. But these are things to bear in mind. Demotivation is something that does, and often I see this, play a part in frequent short-term periods of absence. So again, you need to be mindful of these things, and you need to be curious about what may be causing someone to have frequent short-term periods of absence. You should always strive to remain open-minded about an employee's absences rather than jumping to conclusions. I say this intentionally. because what we don't want to do is make an assumption that the employee is taking time off work without a genuine or good reason. It may be that they have genuine reasons for being off sick, and that we need to make sure that we aren't reaching conclusions based on our own assumptions or born out of frustration. The other important thing is to understand the root cause of the absence. And that's going to be essentially important for you when making decisions about how you approach supporting that individual. So until the cause is correctly identified, it will not be possible to identify an appropriate course of action to remedy it. That's an important point to consider. So when I'm working with clients and advising clients, what I always say is get a good understanding of the root cause, because that's going to shape the advice that you will receive from HR, for example, if you have an internal HR department, but it will also shape the next steps you're going to take to help remedy the situation. So possible impact of workplace factors on absenteeism. So the volume of work or pressure, re deadlines, that plays a significant part. I've just dealt with a case recently whereby an employee was under pressure. They were in a project management role, and actually we had to take into consideration the pressures of their role and the work streams that they had on live projects at that time. So it's really important to make sure that we have an understanding of what employees have in terms of workload and the pressures that does have on their ability to be able to maintain work-life balance, etc. So that's an important point to consider. But perceived ineffective management or an authoritarian management styles, that can be, again, a workplace factor that does impact absence. Unhappy working relationships or outright conflict with colleagues. I can often see absence issues in relation to a breakdown in working relationships. So that's an important point to consider. An employee's inability to cope with change or fear of inadequacy. Bullying or harassment, again, if you're working in the HR space, you may see this on a regular basis. Other factors causing dissatisfaction can be ineffective procedures or equipment, or having no clear targets or goals. So these, again, are important factors that you want to consider when you're looking at short-term absence. Being alert to signals that an employee may be suffering from stress to an extent that they're not coping adequately, really important. If you have employees who may be experiencing workplace stress, we need to take steps to help support them and reduce those stress levels. So again, being curious, understanding the reasons that may be causing ongoing short-term periods of sickness absence is important. Fit notes that state stress, depression or anxiety highlight a potential workplace problem, and you do need to lean into that and to explore what may be going on for that employee and for them in their job role. So that's an important point, again, to consider. Discussing the problem with the employee. This is really important. I can't stress this enough. If you're experiencing, an employee with regular, frequent periods of short-term absence, you should ask them what has led to their short-term absences, whether there's anything in the workplace that's causing or contributing to those absences, and what support they may need to help reduce that and bring their attendance levels in line with what we consider to be acceptable. So when speaking with an employee, be sympathetic and reassure them, show a genuine wish or desire to provide support with a view to resolving the problem. That is really important. If there is a workplace problem, take steps to remove or reduce the problem if possible. Once the cause of frequent absenteeism has been removed or reduced, the employee's attendance may improve. Sometimes it doesn't, and if you have ongoing issues, then we would need to manage that in line with our absence procedure. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean if you do take steps to reduce sickness absence and provide support that you're going to have a positive outcome. Typically, you do see a positive outcome, but if you have ongoing issues, you're going to need to manage that. Failing to support an employee with health problems due to workplace factor may have serious consequences. So as an employer, you could be held liable in law if the employee subsequently has a mental breakdown, for example. So again, we shouldn't be ignoring issues, particularly if there are concerns raised about workplace stress, etc. We need to deal with those and be proactive. So I want to talk about monitoring short-term absences. So there is a lot that managers can do to manage short-term absenteeism. That is an important point to remember. As managers, we have a level of control and influence over this. So taking positive steps to monitor and control periods of absence is really important. And there are two key stages to this. The first one being the action you should take each time an employee is absent. And then the second one being the action you should take when the employee's absence exceeds a defined threshold. So in these circumstances, you're going to want to rely on your HR documentation, so your absence policy for short-term absence, which should be your framework in terms of what you will do. So initiating the procedure, the effective management of short-term sickness absence should start with when an employee contacts you to say they are sick and unable to attend work. There should be a procedure in place that requires the employee to contact a specific person, usually the line manager, and it should be typically by telephone. I'm never a big fan of allowing people to text in or to send emails. You should You should ideally speak to your employee if they're reporting as unable to attend work due to sickness. And the same approach should apply to remote and hybrid workers. So you should be consistent with how you manage. You should maintain a record of sickness absences by completing an absence record form for each employee that you manage, detailing the reason given for that absence. So you've got a clear record of the period of absence and the reasons for absence, because you may want to rely on that later on. Return to work meetings. I can't stress enough how valuable a return to work meeting is. Irrespective of the length of the absence, when an employee returns to work, you should hold a return to work meeting with them. This will deter casual absences, for example, and it shows employees that monitoring absences is taken seriously and that you are going to do that consistently. So I think that is really important. A return to work meeting should be informal, so there's no right to be accompanied to this meeting. It's an informal meeting. You need to make clear the purpose of the meeting, which is to monitor absences. It's not part of a disciplinary procedure. However, the meeting should be more than just a casual chat, because what you are doing is assessing whether someone is fit to return to work, and also you want to review their absence record potentially at this meeting. So take it seriously, make sure the meeting is structured, make sure you have the relevant return to work form that you can use then as a framework for the meeting, and make sure you capture good records. At the meeting, you could ask the employee if they visited the GP and how they're feeling about returning to work. You should also ask if there's anything that you can do to support the employee depending on the reason of sickness absence. You should not ask any intrusive medical questions, but instead you could seek to establish the basic cause of their absence so that you can then capture relevant information for your records. So still talking about return to work meetings, your return to work meeting, as I've said, should be informal, should be structured and factual, should obviously be private and confidential, because we are talking about someone's medical history, essentially, potentially depending on the reasons for sickness absence. And it should be carried out in a positive and supportive way, absolutely taken seriously, because it is an important part of your absence management process. And as I've said already, you need to keep clear records. So I just want to talk about certification. So if an employee is absent for up to a week, they should complete and sign a self-certification form when they return to work. This should be done ideally at the return to work meeting. So this is an important point to bear in mind. And you should countersign the form if you're the line manager responsible for that employee. Absences of even one day should be monitored and recorded in this way. You want to be consistent with all periods of absence, so that you're keeping accurate records and you're being consistent in how you deploy your absence policy across your workforce, essentially. Rather than just having tick boxes, the form should ask the reason for the absence, the dates of absence, whether a doctor was consulted, because this makes the task of self-certifying a more active process. So it's important your form isn't simply a tick box exercise. So just want to move on to fit notes. If an employee is absent for 8 days or more, you should ensure that the employee obtains a fit note from their GP. Fit notes can be issued by doctors, nurses, occupational therapists, pharmacists, or physiotherapists. The fit note will say either that the employee is not fit for work or may be fit for work, depending on the circumstances, taking account of any specified advice from the healthcare professional. So it is important that we remind employees if they're going to be absent for 8 days or more, they need to obtain a fit note from their GP or a medical practitioner. Fit notes do facilitate a returning to work. So where adjustments by the employer would help the employee resume working sooner, as we all know, then it is helpful for a healthcare professional to be able to suggest ways that you as an employer can essentially help your employee return to work by making adjustments. It could be a phased return to work, for example. So they should state that advice, the healthcare professional that is, on a fit note if they believe that you can make adjustments that would facilitate a return to work sooner. So the fit note system does give healthcare professionals the opportunity to highlight one of 4 options to help facilitate a return to work. So it will either be a phased return, amended job duties, altered working hours, or workplace adaptations. They may also write they may also write in the any other option that they believe it may be appropriate in the circumstances, and can add any other relevant information in relation to any adjustments or recommendations they make. So I think that's an important point to consider as well. There is no legal obligation on an employer to comply with any recommendations made on a fit note. So I think that is an important point to consider. I've dealt with a case recently where suggestions were made by the healthcare professional which we weren't able to accommodate, and we were able to objectively justify why that was the case. So I think you don't have to accept any adjustments that are made, but you do need to give them consideration. So any temporary or permanent changes to an employee's hours or job duties should be made only with the agreement of the employee, and you should both agree how long the changes will last, and you might be making those changes based on any recommendations made by a healthcare professional. You should take what the healthcare professional has written seriously and give fair consideration with the employee. It's a dual process, you work with them, because what you want to do is to understand whether any of the changes can be accommodated in practice. A healthcare professional might recommend actions that you could take in case of persistent absences. These changes could then reduce the frequency of absences. So again, pay attention to any recommendations that are made, give them consideration, and document your thought process around the considerations you've given to any recommendations made. A fit note could simply be the starting point for discussions between you and the employee, helping you see if there are any workplace problems you could assist with. So again, is an important part of the process. I think that's a dual slide. Yes, it is. Okay, I want to talk about activating reviews of short-term absences, because I think this again is an important point for you to consider. So the second stage of managing short-term absences will be activated once the employee's absences have reached a defined threshold. So for some of you may be using things like the Bradford factor, for example, where you have defined thresholds that will trigger a part of your absence management process. So it could be that, and I've got an example here, action may be triggered whenever an employee has had 5 separate periods of absence in any 12-month period, or absences totaling more than 12 working days in the same period. So this is an example. I've seen lots of organisations who do things differently, but ultimately you want to have a framework in place that is deployed consistently across your workforce, so that you are managing in the same way with all of your employees when they are, you're seeing periods of absence, short-term absence in particular, that you need to manage. So it's really important that you have a solid framework that you consistently apply. Exceeding the trigger point should activate a review of the employee's attendance, and you should then be able to access all the records you've been keeping whenever somebody is off sick. So that's, again, an important point to consider. Absence reviews, again, it's a continuation, but I've got a bit of a checklist here for you. I'm not going to go through that checklist because I'm going to send the slides out to you, but this is a good checklist that you can use to follow. So things like examine the employee's absence record to check the facts, looking for patterns, check if the absence is work-related, and if so, addressing the problem. These are all important points that you should give consideration to, and you could use this checklist, again, to make sure that you're consistently working with employees to reduce absenteeism. So looking for patterns. So when reviewing an employee's absence record, you want to examine if there is a pattern to their periods of absence. So examples could include frequent Monday absences that occur at a particular time, so just before an important monthly deadline or towards the end of a busy shift cycle, for example. These are things that you could look for and then discuss with the employee. If there is a pattern, you want to speak to the employee about it, be open and honest with them. It should be done factually, so you shouldn't be making accusations against an employee. You should be open-minded, you should avoid assumptions. The simplest way to put the matter to the employee is to first state the facts, and second, to ask the employee if they can explain the pattern that you've identified, and then you work from there. Some do's and don'ts. So what I would say is, don't say you're always off on a Monday. That's very strange, don't you think? What you could say is, I've noticed that 6 out of your 10 absences have been on Mondays, by way of an example. A second example is, I suppose you'll have some excuse or other. That could be unhelpful. What you should say is, would you like to comment on that apparent pattern? So I won't go through all of these for the sake of time, as I want to get to the Q&A section for you. But again, use the slides as a bit of a framework for you if you're looking at how you manage absence in your organisation. And then finally, the main aim of speaking to an employee about a pattern of absences is to try and establish the underlying reason for the reasons for the frequent absenteeism. So it's only when the underlying cause is identified that it will be possible for you to decide what to do about the overall problem. Even if the employee is unable or unwilling to put forward any explanation, the discussion will essentially help you in terms of establishing facts, and also alert the employee to the fact that you've noticed there is a pattern. So that's a really important point. So that is a whistle-stop tour, but I just wanted to make time for questions. There's some contact details for me and my colleague Francesca in the HR service team, and also I work alongside the employment team for people that want employment advice. But I'm going to hand back to Jo for us to go through any questions.
Wow, flipping heck, Nathan, that was quick.
I was worried, I didn't want to lose that because I know everyone enjoys the Q&A section.
No, that's fine. There's a few in there. Right, so Ian's asked, on their initial call, on their initial calling, do you expect the absent employee to give reasons for their sickness, i.e. flu, etc.?
Yeah, I do like an employee to have a reason for sickness absence. I mean, essentially, we can't compel someone to give us a reason for their sickness absence. They may say, actually, it's confidential information between me and my GP. So actually, we can't compel somebody if they don't want to give a reason. But what I always do say is we should be asking the employee, and we certainly should have it in our absence policy that we expect them to contact us, tell us that they're going to be absent from work, and at least to give us a summary overview of why that is, because it helps us understand if there is an issue. I've dealt with a handful of cases recently where an employer said, no, I'm not prepared to share that information with you. All you need to know is that I'm unwell, I'm not able to attend work, and this is when I think I'm going to be able to return. But 95% of the time, an employer will tell you, I'm unwell, I've got a cold, flu, etc. But my expectation is an employer would give you a reason for their sickness absence, essentially.
Okay. Marissa's asked, what if an employee doesn't send the certification even after it's been chased?
We should follow that up with them, is my view. You should follow that up. There should be no reason why it's part of your absence management policy. You could say that it's going to affect your ability to process sick pay, although I would always be mindful of that, particularly if you've got somebody who's had an ongoing period of sickness absence, that we don't just stop sick pay. But ultimately, if they move from self-certifying into being off for 8 days or more, we should be saying to them there's a requirement for you to follow our absence policy. We need a fit note. And again, potentially, you may have to deal with that more formally if they're not going to comply with your absence policy. But I absolutely, in the first instance, wouldn't jump to taking formal action. I would send a request and then follow that up. And then if you get to the stage where you maybe asked twice and they've not made that available to you, maybe we need to write to them and say, look, it's part of our absence policy that you provide a fit note to cover your period of sickness absence. If you do not provide that, we're going to have a further conversation with you, essentially, to understand the reasons for it.
Okay, thank you. Emily's asked, what do you have to do differently if someone has multiple short-term absences which may be linked to a medical condition that may be classed as a disability?
Yeah, if you've got, this is an important point. If you've got somebody who's taking frequent short-term periods of absence, but the reasons for absence are largely the same, and that would suggest that maybe there is an ongoing health condition. What I would do is ask the employee about it. Do they have an ongoing health condition they want to disclose to us? And it may be that what I would advise, if that is the case, we refer to occupational health to get a medical viewpoint on that, and to understand whether there are any adjustments we could make to help reduce their frequent short-term periods of absence. So if we have reason to believe there may be disability at play, then we should be taking steps to understand what that is, how that impacts their ability to attend work on a regular basis. And if there are, if there's likely to be ongoing frequent short-term periods of absence, we need to understand what we can do to support them in reducing that, essentially.
Alison's asked, long-term conditions can be tricky. Our occupational health just says expect a higher than average rate of absence, no guidance. What can we do legally?
Well, we're straight into long-term periods of sickness absence. If we're saying someone's on long-term absence from the workplace, then there isn't a quick answer to managing long-term absence. It tends to be a long-term process, because you're going to have to go through a process whereby they're off for a significant period of time where we go, actually, this is no longer sustainable for us, and potentially you're going to be looking at if they're not going to make a return to work in a reasonable time period, you're going to be looking ultimately at potentially dismissing that employee on grounds of capability in relation to health. But that's not a straightforward process in itself, because you want to make sure that if someone's off for long-term sickness absence, it's likely they may have a disability, and you have to take that into consideration. You don't want to be found that any decision to terminate employment was a discriminatory one. So in those circumstances, if you've got somebody on long-term sickness absence, you'd be looking at occupational health referrals, working with the employee, opening up the lines of communication, understanding what's causing their long-term sickness absence, and then talking to them about what could be done to help them return to work in a meaningful time period. You need to go through those processes and show that you're being reasonable in the circumstances before you reach any decision, in my view, to terminate employment on grounds of capability in relation to health, because you don't want to be seen to have shortcutted the process, essentially, and essentially open yourselves up to any disability discrimination claims. I hope that answers that question.
So just going back to Emily's question, Nathan, she's just asked to dig a bit deeper and said if someone did have a disability and occupational health said that they would have frequent short-term absence, if that would impact the business, sorry, I can't just see that, it's something's in the way. If that would impact the business to a point it wasn't sustainable, what can you do in that case? What can you do to ensure you are reasonable, and would it be a capability process?
Well, yeah, it would be. In essentially what I've just said in response to the previous question, ultimately you would have to follow a capability process potential for that employee. And the starting process would be to obviously understand, long-term sickness absence typically, for me, I always say when you get to a state where someone's off for 3-4 weeks, that's long-term sickness absence. Now, what you would need to do is understand what's brought that about. You're likely to have that understanding because they're going to have fit notes, so we're going to know what this situation is. If someone's broken a leg and they're off for 8 weeks, that's long-term sickness absence, but the return to work is going to be pretty much defined by the doctor saying they're likely to be able to return to work within, 8 weeks, for say, as an example. But if you've got somebody who's off longer term because they've got ongoing health situation, I've dealt with a case recently where someone has been absent from work due to chronic fatigue. I've had another person who has cancer and is receiving treatment, and so they're likely to be off for many months. And so essentially, the clients that we've been working with are having to go through a process whereby they're opening up the lines of communication with the employee, understanding the impact of the health condition, talking to them about when they're likely to make a return to work, making a referral to an OH advisor, but also engaging with the employee's healthcare provider or practitioner, I should say. So it might be a GP, it might be a consultant, depending on the situation, and asking them relevant questions around, do they think the employee's like to make a meaningful return to work in the near future? What you want to do is gather all that information and evidence, because if you get an occupational health report that says, actually, it's unlikely this employee is going to be able to make a return to work in the near future or at all, then you're able to start relying on that evidence, which will help shape and inform your decision making. But the process, when you're dealing with long-term sickness absence, you are having to go through processes whereby you're, obtaining up-to-date medical information, you're obtaining information from the employee themselves, you're looking at adjustments that you could make to facilitate return to work. And if you've exhausted those steps and it's unlikely the employee is going to be able to return to work in the near future and you can't sustain that, then you're looking at, capability dismissal on grounds of ill health, essentially. But what I always say in these circumstances, take proper advice. Don't make quick decisions to dismiss or terminate employment, because you want to mitigate as much risk as possible of an employee bringing a claim. I hope that answers that question. Let me know if it does.
If anyone wants to come off mute as well and ask anything, that's fine. I think you've just answered this, Nathan. Chelsea's asked, when does something count as long-term sickness absence, or is it different for each business? But I think you probably just answered.
No, there's a standard. Yeah, there's a standard. I would say it's either 3 or 4 weeks. From I was going to say it's 3 weeks. I think maybe 4. I can't remember off the top of my head, but for me, when anybody, by the time someone's been out of the business for 3 weeks, certainly 4 weeks, that's long term. They've been out for a considerable time period, but that doesn't mean that long term bit of absence isn't going to come to an end within a reasonable time period. But there are cases, I'm sure we'll all agree with, where you know that an employee is going to be absent. I dealt with one last year where an employee was absent at the point we were advising the client. They'd been absent for 9 months. And it wasn't likely to, they weren't likely to make a return to work in the near future either. So ultimately that ended up with us, the client dismissing that employee on due to capability on grounds of ill health. But they went through the process, got OH involved, we got a report from their GP, etc. So, but there is a process to follow, for sure.
Right, so Ian's asked, short-term absence, what are your views on EMG leave? For example, having to take time off at the last moment when no childcare is available. What
EMG leave? We're talking about emergency leave.
Yeah, I think
time
so.
For childcare.
What view, in terms of the notice time the employee knew 1 day, 2? Ian, I don't know if I've said that correctly. Do you want to come off mute to ask it?
Yes, I can. How much notice counts as emergency leave? So, i.e., someone knows, say, 2 days in advance of something. Is that emergency leave? Is that emergency leave request? Clearly, if they know a week in advance, it's not. So there's 2 parts to this, really, is how much is the notice and how much emergency leave are they entitled to take?
Well, are we talking about time off for dependents, for childcare?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So time off for dependents. I mean, ultimately, if they've got a family emergency, they will need to take time, time off. Or you can't avoid that. What I would be saying to employees, if they know 2 days in advance, I've got a childcare issue, or I'm not going to be able to attend work, then they need to be talking to you about that. My only challenge then would be if they've got 48 hours notice, there's a potential issue, that would suggest they've got time to find, a solution to that particular situation. I mean, usually time off dependence is something whereby a child's unwell, they can't attend school, the parent then has to, the primary care of that child then has to be at home to look after them. And obviously, that's you haven't got an issue with that. But yeah, if you're able to establish that they had knowledge 48 hours prior to taking that time off, that they would need to take that time off, but didn't say, share that with you, I'd be having a conversation with them about why that was and why they weren't able to find a solution within that 48-hour period to cover their childcare arrangements. Now, I appreciate, don't worry, I have an 8-year-old myself, and I know the joy of juggling, our parenting responsibilities with work. But yeah, I don't know whether I've answered that, Ian, but my view is if an employee has knowledge 48 hours before they need to take time off, they should be telling you at the earliest opportunity. But I wouldn't consider that, like an emergency in the truest sense, because an emergency happens on the day and you have to drop things to be, present with your children, don't you?
Yeah, I agree with you.
My view is, Ian, I'm always up for a challenge. I like to have, I would push back and say, hey, we want to support you. Absolutely. We get that you've got childcare responsibilities, but, if you've got knowledge of needing to take time off, come and talk to us so we can make plans together.
Which is either leave or unpaid leave potentially, but both of those are, and the difference being that both of those are refusable compared to the emergency.
Yeah. So do you have a policy around emergency leave?
Only the only the national guidance.
Yeah. Oh, right, fine.
Yeah.
Fine. My point is, if they've got knowledge that they need time off several days before it's needed, then they should be telling you, so you can, so the business can make plans. Yeah, I hope that answers that, Ian.
It does, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Right, Emily's just asked, on time off for dependents, am I right in saying there is nothing concrete to say what an acceptable limit of this is?
Oh, you're going to ask me, hang on, let me see, there is I haven't got that in me. I might come back to you on that because I don't want to give you the wrong information. Emily, can you give Joe your email address? And I will think, because I don't know whether I'm going to get in. Let me in. Let me have a look. Let me see if I can get into my system. No, I don't think it will.
Shirley wants to know it as well.
Yeah,
I've got your email, Shirley. I know that.
Yeah, I don't. My thinking off the top of my head is, but I just want to check. There isn't. I don't think there is a set of fixed number of days off allowed for time of dependence. Obviously, it needs managing. But let me just double check. No, it's not going to let me in. I will come back to you. Because
there's a few people now, Nathan, wanting to know that. So
because we've got time off dependence. If you've got parental leave, which you can take, I think it's 18 weeks off the top of my head again. But I don't think there's a fixed number of days for time off dependence. But obviously, it would need managing, because essentially, if you've got somebody who every other week is needing to take time off for childcare arrangements, for example, that's going to become disruptive operationally. You would need to manage that. We would have to say to them, look, we've got concerns about the number of days that you're taking to, for, say, childcare as an issue, because talking about, well, it might not just be childcare, it could be for, caring responsibilities. But, if it's happening regularly, you're going to have to then deal with that, but obviously deal with it in a sensitive way. But I'll come back to you by email, but I don't think there's a fixed number of days off the top of my head. Oh, yeah, perfect. Thanks, Emily. I'll come back to you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Sorry, I can't get into. It's typical when you need to get into the system.
Oh, no, don't worry. Right, there's no other questions on there now. Does anyone else have any other questions, or does anyone want to come off mute and ask any questions? Take this invaluable opportunity while you've got Nathan at hand. Okay, well, what I'll do the clause, Nathan, and then
fine.
Pops up in the message. We can always answer it. So as I've put on the chat box, I will send out some correspondence to everyone that signed up for the event this afternoon, and I'll put a post on LinkedIn. So if you would like a copy of the slides or the recording, then please put a message against the LinkedIn post. Our next lot of events kick off in September. The first one is on Tuesday the 8th and is called Leading the New Era of Sexual Harassment Prevention. A link to sign up for the next events will be included in the email. If anyone's recruiting, we've also got FD Recruit, Exec Recruit and Charity Recruit within the group. But otherwise, I'd just like to say a massive thanks to you, Nathan, for your time and effort in putting the event together, and to everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry we were...
Is in there. No, there's nothing else in there, Nathan, so you'll get to your meeting on time.
Oh, no, well, I appreciate everyone attending. As I say, it was a whistle-stop tour. Normally, I have plenty of time. It's just I've got a client meeting which I need to attend to. But otherwise, I will see you again very soon because we've got another.
That's great. And when you've responded to me, Nathan, I'll follow up with the other people who requested.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Yeah, perfect.
Thanks very much, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.